Hello, welcome to this next lecture video on standard costing. So we left off and we're now on page 237 of your course pack. So it says, now that we've learned what variances are, let's work through an example for Speeds Incorporated. Before we can find any variances, we need to determine what the standards are for the product. Speeds Incorporated makes a popular jogging suit, and the company wants to develop standards for materials, labor, and variable manufacturing overhead. Material known as Verilon is used in jogging suits. The standard price for a yard of Verilon is determined as follows. We have our purchase price, less our discount. For shipping, our receiving and handling gives us a standard price per yard of $6. And you can see that these are attainable standards. Okay? The standard quantity of Verilon in one jogging suit is computed as follows. We have our bill of materials that should use 2.8 yards. We have our allowance for waste and allowance for rejects. Gives us 3.5 yards. So each jogging suit should use 3.5 yards of material, and each yard of material should cost us $6 to purchase from our suppliers. And you can see again, this is an attainable standard. Okay? This is also an attainable standard. And we can look over here, we can see this includes the shipping and receiving and handling. And when I was talking about attainable standards here, this includes the allowance for waste and also the allowance for rejects, okay, that we make mistakes. We can say down here, based on the information here, what's the standard cost of materials for one jogging suit? Well, if each suit takes 3.5 yards of material at $6 per yard, that can go 6 times 3.5, that gives us our $21 per suit. Okay? $21 of materials per suit. All right, that should be the standard cost for materials. Now what we can do is we can go ahead and look at this in terms of our direct labor. We can say here's our average wage rate, $13 an hour. We have our fringe benefits of $4 an hour. Our employment taxes, that gives us $18 per hour. This is our price standard for labor. And then we have our attainable standards right over here in terms of our labor efficiency standard. We say our basic time should be 1.4 hours. We allow for any breaks, setup, any rejects, and then we get 2 hours per suit. So it should take us 2 hours to make each suit, and we pay $18 per hour. What is the standard cost for labor for one suit? We can come over here and say it's our 2 times our 18, which gives us our $36 per suit. Okay, $36 per suit. Continuing on, now what we can do is we can look at our variable manufacturing overhead. So Speeds applies overhead to products on the basis of our direct labor hours. The variable portion of our predetermined overhead rate is $4 per hour. Okay? What's the standard cost of variable overhead for one unit of product? Well, if each suit takes us 2 hours and we have a variable rate of $4 per hour, what we can do is we can say our 2 hours times our $4 per hour gives us $8 in variable overhead per suit. Continuing on, what we can do now is we can complete a standard cost card. This will help us decide what the total standard cost is per suit. So we can look back, if we recall, each suit required 3.5 yards, and it was $6 per yard. So the 3.5 times the $6 gives us our $21 of materials cost per suit. Then we have our labor, 2 hours, $18 per hour. $36 of labor per suit. And then we have our variable overhead, supplied based upon labor. So we had our 2 hours. That's where we had our 2 hours of labor per suit. And then remember, it's $4 of variable overhead per hour. That gives us our $8. We can add the 21 plus the 36 plus the 8. That gives us $65 per suit. Okay? That's the standard cost of making one suit. It should cost us $65 to make one suit. Okay? So now what we can do is we can use this information on how much it costs us in terms of materials, labor, and overhead to develop variances. And remember, variances, what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at a materials price variance and a materials quantity variance. We're also going to be looking at a labor rate, which is a labor price variance, and then a labor quantity variance. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at, says, right now that we have the standard costs, we can start our variance analysis. And we can refer to our standard cost card right up here to help us out with our variance analysis. Okay? We can see that we had 5,000 suits that we completed. Our cost of the material purchase was 20,000 yards at $5.40 per yard, which gives us $108,000 total that we paid for our materials. And then we used 20,000 yards. Now in this case, our used of 20,000 yards is the same as the 20,000 yards that we purchased. This doesn't always have to be the case. There could certainly be situations where we use 15,000, we purchase 20,000, or vice versa if we have some beginning inventory left over. Okay, so these don't always have to be the same, and that's important because when we're calculating variances, when we're calculating a price variance for materials, we want to look at how many yards that we purchase. When we are looking at the quantity variance for materials, we want to look at how many yards did we use. Okay? So let's look over here and let's go ahead and calculate our price variance and our quantity variance and then our overall variance. And this is where we look back on that prior page, our formulas for price variance and quantity variance. Okay? So you can see this actual quantity purchased times the actual price minus the actual quantity purchased times the standard price, actual quantity used times the standard price minus our standard quantity that we should have used times the standard price. Right? So we can go ahead and do that right over here. So we write it out. Our AQ times our AP minus our AQ times our SP. We can say, we look back on that prior page, right over here, it said we averaged 20,000 yards that we purchased. So that's our actual quantity purchased, 20,000 yards. And then what we can say is, what is the actual price paid? $5.40 per yard. It's right there, $5.40 per yard. Minus the 20,000 yards that I actually purchased, my AQ, times the standard price. That's from our cost card. It's $6. And then when we do the math, we get 12,000. Now, I don't show this as a 12,000 negative or positive. I show the absolute value. And the reason for that is I think it's easier to understand. And so I'm going to show the absolute value of 12,000, which is what you get when you do the math. Okay? But then what I want to decide is this favorable or unfavorable? And in this case, it's favorable. Why is it favorable? Well, I paid $5.40 per yard when I should have paid $6 per yard. So I'm paying less than the standard. That's favorable because that would mean that expenses are less than the standard. So I'm going to put a little F here, saying 12,000 favorable. Then I'm going to come down to my quantity variance formula. AQ, can look back over here, and this is it. AQ times SP minus SQ times SP. Now in this case, though, when I'm talking about AQ, I'm talking about the actual quantity used, not the actual quantity purchased. In this case, it happens to be the same thing, but it doesn't always have to be. I can say my actual quantity used times my standard price minus my standard quantity times my standard price. Okay? So my actual quantity used says right over here, 20,000 yards right there. 20,000 times my standard price, we know that's 6. The standard price is 6, as it was here. See? Okay? Now, how do I figure out my standard quantity? Because I'm not told what my standard quantity is. But there's a way that I can figure it out. I'm going to have to do a calculation to do that. So I'm going to write over here standard quantity, and I'm going to go through and calculate it out. Okay? So what I had is I made 5,000 suits. It says that right over here. And then if we look back up here at the cost card, we should use 3.5 yards of material for each suit. So what I can do is I can multiply my 5,000 times my 3.5 yards per suit, and then what that gives me is my 17,500. 5,000 yards, 5,000 suits, sorry, times 3.5 yards per suit would equal my 17,500. Okay? So when I do the math, I get 15,000. And again, I'm going to show the absolute value. I'm not going to show it as a positive or negative number. And what I'm going to do is put either an F or a U. U means unfavorable. F would mean favorable. Now, in this case, how do I decide that? Well, it says I used 20,000 yards, but I should have only used 17,500. I used 20,000 yards to make 5,000 suits. I should have only used 17,500 yards to make 5,000 suits. So I used more material than I should have. That would imply more expense than I want. That is unfavorable. Right? So now when I look at the overall variance, I can say I have my 12,000 favorable and 15,000 unfavorable. So when I take my 15,000 minus my 12,000, what I have is 3,000 unfavorable. That would be my overall variance. Now, one explanation for what could be going on, and this is kind of interesting because we have a favorable price variance and an unfavorable quantity variance. Sometimes, right, that looks good over here on the surface, but it's really a problem. What's one particular thing that could explain what's going on is that perhaps the purchasing manager, who is responsible for the price variance, the production manager is responsible for the quantity variance. The purchasing manager, to make themselves look good, bought cheaper materials. Right? Now what happens when you buy cheaper materials is that you can use more than what you should because you could have waste and rejects and spoilage, and so those materials aren't as good. And so you have poor materials, you bought them cheap, bought cheap materials, poor quality, you have a favorable price variance, but due to the poor quality of the materials, you have an unfavorable quantity variance. So what's going to happen, right, is the production supervisor looks poor and look bad. The purchasing manager looks good. So this is where you can have some internal politics within the organization. The production supervisor could go have a talk with the purchasing manager and say, stop buying cheap materials. That's one thing that could be going on. Could be others, but that would be one explanation that's consistent with the numbers. In the next lecture video, we'll continue on with direct labor. Thanks.